Hey, YouTube. Happy Friday. Happy Friday. Well, I'm going to do something a little different today. So, recently, somebody who will remain nameless threatened to dig up my past and investigate me and all this kind of stuff. And it put me in mind of something that I hadn't done in a long time. I hadn't talked about METH MONSTER. So, anybody out there in the world, if you really want to get some dirt on Timothy Blaine, it's not that hard. You can save your $35 for the background check. I'll put it all in the book, METH MONSTER. So I thought I'd come and read a little bit of this book. I should have, yeah. So because I think I want to encourage people to write. Nothing is more important than writing your story down, telling your whole story. Free. And the truth, the truth will make you free. Not only the truth of Christ, truth in general. People don't respect truth anymore, it seems like. We got this Donald Trump out there, he just lie and lie and lie and lie. And I'm sure he doesn't even know what the truth is. It's all spin with him. It's all spin with a lot of people. Truth. If you are suffering under addictions or obsessions and things like that, nothing's going to help you more than writing down your story. At least that has been my experience. They teach you in 12-step Alcoholics Anonymous. I did that for a while. Part of that program is to write down, what do they call it? I think it's step 4. Write a list of every person you've ever harmed or whatever. I took it a step further. And I just wrote my whole story, my whole life story, right? So I want to encourage people to do that. Now, if your parents, your immediate family read that book, believe me, it is worth the effort. It takes about a year. But I'm going to read a little bit of the story. I want to emphasize that if you are a hateful, evil person and you want to find something about me, just get my book. Spend that $9.99 for the hardcover, or you can get the download for I think $2.50. You can know all the tea just that quickly, right? Anyway, so let me start. I'm gonna read a tiny little bit of this. I'll tell you how I first got the idea to write, and how long it took me to actually get to my computer and start the project, because I wrote it all in the story, right? Okay. So this is my first book. Now, I wrote other books that are fiction, which are good books, but nothing is like telling your own story, right? Okay, so I'm going to read a little bit of this. Hold on. And I want to encourage people to write. People don't buy books very much anymore, and a lot of people don't read it much anymore. But nothing is more freeing. Put your own story down. Yeah. Here we go. Where to begin? Who am I kidding? I don't have a clue as to where to begin writing a book about my life. I am no writer. It's not likely that I'll ever write any great work of fiction or win any literary awards. No, as far as I know, I'm not gifted in that way. But I do, like you, have one story to tell. Or, in the language I use today, a testimony. Yesterday morning, I woke up with an almost overwhelming urge to go to my computer, turn it on, sit down, and begin to write this book. What is interesting to note is that prior to 6 o'clock yesterday morning, I don't remember having even have so much as a passing thought of taking on such a project as this. Now, you have to understand something right off the top. It is only because of the Lord that I am sitting at this desk right now. Because if anybody else would have come to my bedroom at 6 o'clock in the morning talking about writing a book or a letter or even my name, for that matter, I would have questioned their sanity, their sobriety, and possibly their right to live. No, I've learned that when the Lord God says move, I move. Faith without works is dead. No sense in sitting up arguing with the Lord. He already knows how dumb you think you are, he already knows that I type with one finger, and yes, the Lord our God in heaven knows every detail of the story I'm about to tell you. And yet, even with all of that, at times damaging information, God loves me. I know that today. He loves me. He loves you in exactly the same way. It doesn't matter if you're a homeless heroin addict or a televangelist. God loves us all through the blood of Jesus Christ, our only hope of glory. I know some of you may be thinking, well, we all know that, but do we really? Or have some of us been robbed? Have we been cheated out of our inheritance? Have we allowed the church to cover the Christ with so much religion and opinion that we really don't even know who Jesus Christ really is, or what our God has done for all of us in him? Well, I can only speak for myself. For most of my life, I didn't know Jesus. I barely even knew who he was. Oh, I knew the Christmas songs, and I've seen images of the baby in the manger for as many years as I've been alive. I even played one of the wise men in my 6th grade Christmas play. Lord knows I've seen and worn the crosses. But know the Lord? The very best I could say was, yes, I believe there is a God somewhere. A big part of the problem was the excuse me. A big part of the problem was the fact that from as far back as I can remember, I was homosexual. I'm not talking about finding out during puberty or discovering myself as a teenager or young adult. I'm talking 8 or 9 years old, I knew I was gay. That's before I even knew what sex was, really. I am convinced that homosexuality is not something that you do. It's something that you are. Now, how would anybody react to a religion that has always seemed to take such exceedingly great pleasure in proclaiming that who you are is sin, plain and simple? I've never seen anything quite like it. I cannot tell you how many times I've been kicking back watching Christian television, hoping to get a word from the Lord, or at the very least a word of encouragement, when bam, here we go again. Homosexuality is a sin, an abomination. God hates fags, turn or burn, and on and on and on and on. This usually followed by some cruel joke about some out celebrity or the old standby, Adam and Steve. That followed by a rush of laughter and something akin to joy flowing all through the building. Now I know I know that emotional cruelty is not funny to me as an adult, but imagine the effect that must have on an 8 or 9-year-old child. You expect it from the other kids. After all, they're just kids. That bullying spirit sits heavily on our young lives. But what about when it comes from the adults, or even worse, from the pulpit? Try as I might, I know I won't be able to resist challenging some of those self-righteous, condescending, bullying spirits on the subject of winning the world for Christ. Okay, I'm not going to sit here and read that part. Now, don't be deceived, because you reading that, you would think, okay, this is a religious book. I ain't interested. I'm bored with that. But I had to. That's where I was when I started writing this book. I was just that excited about my newfound faith. So we're going to skip through a little bit. Okay, that was chapter 1. And it goes on. Chapter 2, Easter Sunday, 1958. Coincidentally, Easter is this Sunday. Well, I was born on Easter Sunday in 1958. So I'll read you a paragraph or two from that chapter. Well, you can relax, reader. I'm not going to try to tie some deep spiritual meaning to the fact that I was born on Easter Sunday. But nevertheless, that's what happened. The way my mother tells it, she was in church praising the Lord when she went into labor. Mother was 17 years old and unmarried. We lived in Indianapolis, Indiana. We were without a doubt poor, but not much poorer than most black folks at that time. Of course, I was barely aware of what was going on back then, what with being a baby and all. But over the years, I must have heard it at least 100 times or more. You see, I'm from one of those big African-American families. Grandmother had 9 children, 5 boys, 4 girls. And of course, all of them had children too. Yes, my grandmother's house was always full of people. We celebrated everything together. Thanksgiving, Christmas Eve, 4th of July, and pretty much anything else my grandmother was willing to cook for. Make no mistake about it. If my grandmother was cooking, everybody was coming. To this very day, one tradition stands firm in that family, At some point, the adults separate and start up a conversation about the good old days and how poor they were. Back then, I never did quite get how they could recall the very worst of economic circumstances and then identify those days as the good old days. I say they because this conversation was only for the generation before me. My generation didn't know what poor was. In my family, you had to really know poor, talk about poor. So this is the way I was able to piece together most of what I know about my early beginnings. Of course, as in most families, there are some things that nobody wants to talk about. Isn't it strange how those are the very things that I remember best? But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here already. I need to go back a little bit. Okay, I'm going to read one more paragraph from this chapter, and we're going to move on, because I think it's significant. When I was a little past my first birthday, my mother got married. You would think that this would be good news, what with her being an unwed mother and all. Mother should have been finishing up high school in 1959. Instead, here she was, 18 years old, with a 1-year-old baby and no husband. I never did get the story about my natural father. I never did get the story straight about my natural father. I do have a vague memory of meeting him, so maybe he stopped by to see me once or twice before he took off. Mother never once badmouthed him, so I figured they must have just been a couple of teenagers who got in trouble, and according to my mother, on her very first time around. No hard feelings, but no family. Then along came a spider and sat down beside her. If only my mother would have run away. Didn't she know that spiders bite? Billy Jackson, not his real name, was to be my mother's first husband. Tall, dark, and I guess many women would say handsome. A real slickster, that Billy Jackson. Dark skin, shiny white teeth, shiny processed hair, shiny shoes and fingernails. Yep, I guess you could say that pretty much everything about Billy Jackson was shiny. Everything except for his eyes. There was something about that man's eyes that sends a chill through me even now. If it's true, as they say, that the eyes are the windows to the soul, then Billy Jackson's soul was a dark and scary thing. Billy was from San Francisco, and maybe that was part of the attraction. Maybe my mother saw Billy as her ticket out of Naptown, that's Indianapolis, and her current circumstances. Or maybe she really did love him. I don't know what the motivation was. I only know what happened. They met, got married, and had a little girl. Then off the four of us went to San Francisco, California. So I've returned back to my roots. We came here, I was 3. We stayed here for about 3 years before he started beating the shit out of her. Okay. I'm not sure exactly how long after we arrived in California that the beating started, but start they did. Billy was a cruel and brutal wife beater. There were probably already danger signals going off long before we left Indianapolis, but there my mother had her 5 brothers. Now we were over 2,000 miles away, living in Billy's hometown. No brothers and no witnesses, at least not any that knew or cared anything about my mother. The gloves came off. Okay, let me get out of that chapter. I come up hard, babe, but not up cool. Okay, let's do a little chapter 3. Chapter 3, I just arrived in California. Okay, I was 19 years old, and I arrived in Hollywood. I got a jaywalking ticket just as I was coming out of the Greyhound bus station. In town, not even 15 minutes, and already I was talking to the cops. Was this some kind of omen? Well, if the Lord was trying to tell me something, I definitely was not listening. I already had way too much on my mind. One thing, I didn't know a single solitary soul in L.A. Second, I had a total of $37 in my pocket. I still remember that number, 37. Third, I didn't have a clue where I was going to sleep that night. And fourth, it was raining and hard. Oh, well, I thought, I already knew it was going to be rough. No sense in whining about it now. First things first, which way is Hollywood? That was the one thing that I was very clear about. I had no interest in the rest of Los Angeles. I knew exactly where I wanted to be. You see, mixed in with all of my California dreaming was a childlike desire to make it big in show business. This just tickles me today because I can't for the life of me figure out exactly what part of the business I thought I was going to make it big in. I couldn't sing, I couldn't dance, I couldn't act, juggle, or do magic tricks. No, I was either clinically delusional or I was trying very hard to convince myself and everyone around me that there was some practical reason behind my need to live in Hollywood. When I arrived at the corner of Hollywood and Vine in the midst of that brainstorm in the summer of 1977, I couldn't believe my eyes. I didn't even want to get off the bus. This was terrible. I don't know what exactly I was expecting, but it sure wasn't this. Nothing but soaking wet homeless people, hookers, hustlers, drug addicts, and drag queens. So this is what Hollywood Boulevard was off camera, I thought. There was certainly nothing glamorous about it. And that is a gross understatement. Sleazy is the word. I can still remember walking up and down the boulevard in that rain the first night, not knowing where I was going or what I was even doing there, really. What kind of a person just hops on a bus and comes to a place like this with no money and no place to live? I asked myself, it doesn't make sense. But I never once thought about going back to Indiana. There was no going back. I absolutely had to make it here. It must have been on my second or third time down the length of the boulevard that I met Johnny. And believe it or not, it was just that simple. I moved into his apartment that very same night. Actually, there were quite a few people living in Johnny's apartment. They were a band of black, gay Buddhists from Chicago. What's that? Okay. Not only were they black and gay and Buddhist, they were also entertainers. Their big claim to fame was that they hadn't been gonged on the Gong Show. Their stage routine was very funny, but to me they were just funny people. They all called each other Miss Thang, or girlfriend, or Mary, or just plain girl. It seemed like every third word was honey. This took a little getting used to, and yet I found it not only very funny, but a reasonable act of rebellion. Man, how I would chuckle when I was introduced to people like Miss Fred or Miss Charles. These guys were hysterical to me. They seemed to elevate camp to an art form. So my first couple of hours in Hollywood I had gotten lucky. Things could have gone a lot differently. I would have done anything to stay in LA. Okay. Still with me? You see how we're moving away from religion? Okay. This is chapter 4. I'm going to read a tiny bit. It's only 9 chapters in this book, so we'll see how far we can get. Chapter 4. So there's a whole chapter there. I'm just reading a couple of paragraphs from each chapter. Chapter 4. Jimmy came into my life in the summer of 1980. I was 22 and he was 29. That's quite a difference in gay years. I won't say that it was love at first sight, but there was something significant that moved between us right before he passed out. We met at the Rusty Nail, West Hollywood's one and only interracial hangout. That's not to say that there weren't black folks hanging out in the other bars. In most, there were usually 3 or 4 of us. Yeah, that's about right. 3 or 4 black guys and 1 to 200 whites. Now, I'm not suggesting that this meant that the entire community of West Hollywood was racist, but it did cater overwhelmingly to white men seeking the company of other white men. The Rusty Nail was different. This was a bar that at least in 1980 marketed itself to black men who were into whites and to white men who were into blacks. The Nail was where David and I had met. David was the first lover, and I had gone whenever we. The Nail was where David and I had gone whenever we went out. And it was there that I met my second lover, Jimmy. There's only been 2. So I talked about David in the last chapter. We're just getting a little bit of this. When I look back over my life, even today, I believe that Jimmy is the only person I ever really loved. We went home together that first night, and we had what I thought was a good and memorable time. 2 weeks later, however, when I ran into him again, he didn't even know who I was. As it turns out, when we met, he'd been in the middle of an alcohol-induced blackout. So what could I do? I let him pick me up for the first time all over again. A mild-mannered bank teller by day, Jimmy was a rip-roaring alcoholic by night. He was the kind of guy who would sit on a bar stool until either he fell off or the bartender cut him off. That was how Jimmy drank. When he wasn't drinking, Jimmy was a kind and gentle, generous and loving-spirited guy. In fact, Jimmy wasn't a bad guy when he drank either. Just what you might call sloppy. And man, oh man, did that dude have a Roman eye. Jimmy had been a heroin addict as a teenager. But at the time we met, he was 8 years clean, at least from heroin. Coming from all that, I guess he saw his drinking as child's play. And I suppose he had a point, in a way. I mean, everybody drinks, right? Besides, how could you be gay if you didn't drink? The bars were the social center of our world. Jimmy thought it hysterical that I could actually get falling down drunk on just 3 drinks. He, on the other hand, would arrive at the bar at about 8, locate a stool with a view, place 2 packs of cigarettes on the counter, and then sit there and drink until the lights came up. Okay, so that's the beginning of chapter. Let me see. That's a good juicy chapter right there. This was the one love. This also covers the HIV when we first heard about it, how we got it. Jimmy died from AIDS back in 91. But it discovered how it talked about how that whole community changed. Our community changed when AIDS came. It talks about when the drugs came, when he got rehooked on heroin, when I got hooked on meth. There's a lot in that chapter. But I'm skipping through, and I want you guys to buy the book. I think it's an interesting read. This is the best-selling book I ever wrote, METH MONSTER. Sold a lot of copies. For me. Okay, chapter 5, METH MONSTER. This is one of the favorites. This is the chapter that I named the book after. It is an awful thing when a person is reduced to defining their life by the drugs they take. But that is exactly what meth did for me. Try as I might, there is simply no way for me to minimize the impact with which crystal meth slammed into my life, at least not without straying far from the truth. It was like throwing a 40-pound sledgehammer through a plate glass window. Mind you, I was not going into this thing totally blind. I had been coveting this drug and obsessing about this drug for a full 2 years before I got around to actually trying it. Did I bring my water? Y'all, I'm sorry. My voice is going. Y'all got to wait till I get some water. 1 minute. I'll run. Run, Timothy. Come on, dog. Get out the way, dog. Move. Okay. You still with me? We're just having some fun here. Maybe this won't get a lot of views, but I was reminded of this. Okay. So I said that I was obsessing about this drug. I had joined AA because of drinking. Jimmy and I went out to the bars every night, and I got hooked on alcohol. While I was going to AA for the drinking, and we broke up right around the time that and his cheating, I started going to 12-step meetings. That became my new community, right? At that time, crystal meth was epidemic in West Hollywood. So all these guys were coming in and they were talking about all these sexcapades with crystal meth. And I know it should have sounded bad because they were coming in toe up, but it sounded very interesting to me. Anyway, I'm not embellishing. This is just what happened. Okay, mind you, I was not going into this thing totally blind. I had been coveting this drug and obsessing about this drug for a full 2 years before I got around to actually trying it. Of course, in the beginning, it wasn't so bad. It wasn't such a bad thing. No, to the contrary. In the beginning, crystal meth seemed like the best thing that ever happened to me. 3 or 4 days after I relapsed on alcohol, I found myself at a big dance bar in Hollywood. It was the weekend of the Gay Pride Parade, and the atmosphere was especially festive. I had been drinking every night since the day I gave up my sobriety, and by Sunday morning I was very, very drunk. This particular bar was known for its all-day beer bus, which started promptly at 6 a.m. every Sunday morning. It was also the easiest place to find meth, and that's where it all began. I was already drunk and obnoxious, so what the hell? I just walked up to the first dude I saw who looked like he was dancing a little too fast for the music. And the next thing I knew, we were sitting in his car doing the deal. And then not 10 minutes later, when I walked back into the bar, I had a sudden realization. I was no longer drunk. Just like that, I was in full control of my mind and all my senses. There was another thing that I think was very significant about this maiden voyage into the underworld of meth. From across the dance floor, I spotted this really attractive young guy leaning over the balcony and above the smoking crowd. And I thought, this has to be the most attractive dude in the place. And you know what I did? I walked right over to him and I introduced myself. And when we finally left that bar, we left together. Now I'm getting tired. My eyes are getting tired. Okay. Now you would probably have to be me to understand that I could never have done that on my own. Even with the help of alcohol, my fear of rejection had always been so intense that I rarely approached anybody. So what was this? Where was the fear? It sounds ridiculous even to me if I suggest that a person can be totally hooked on a drug from the very first time they use it. So let me see if I can put it a different way. Nope, there is no better way to put it. I was hooked on meth from the very first time I used it. Hooked because I could not stop using it after that first morning at the bar. That first day I spent $10. The next day it was 80. And by the third day I was back in the department stores, stealing to support my high. I want to digress here for a moment because if there is one thing that I don't want to do, it is to spark anyone else's curiosity about this or any other drug. To this day, I still struggle with the fact that I first heard about crystal meth in 12-step meetings. But I believe that the Lord is calling on me to tell the whole truth, and I intend to do just that. If you are a person who is still struggling to stay sober, or if all this drug talk simply makes you uncomfortable, then please, turn the page, man, woman. That's what I would do. Ultimately, this book is about getting off drugs, after all, not getting on them. A little bit more here. That being said, those early party days on meth were admittedly a lot of fun. It seemed like I just literally danced right through the first few months. And then, just like with alcohol, there was a shift. That's the thing about what I call drug demons. At first, they just seem to do so much for you. And then, after they get you under their power, it is you that will do anything for them. One minute, I was spinning around on the dance floor just as free as an eagle in flight. And then, in what seemed like just the blink of an eye, I found myself sitting on the floor of a cockroach-infested abandoned building trying to find a vein. But in fact, my flight from the dance floor to the nasty floor took about a year. See what I mean? I didn't leave anything out of this. One more paragraph here. I was still doing the club scene when I started going to jail. Way back when I was with David, I went to county jail a few times. But now I was going all the time. I was what you would call a petty criminal at that time. And when I got arrested, 90% of the time, it was for shoplifting. The whole thing had gotten a whole lot more desperate. At first, I just needed enough money to score one time. Then I would sell and barter what little I had to get more and more dope until I went to sleep 3 or 4 days later. Soon I couldn't sell any drugs. I was doing it all myself. And after I started shooting up, the party was essentially over. I didn't have time to stand around in bars or clubs. I needed $100 a day minimum to stay high. And as I began stealing more, jail became a second home. With each stint in jail, I came out knowing more and more of what I considered to be the real drug addicts. These were easily identifiable speed freaks. Many picked at their skin, wore dirty clothes, and for some reason always seemed to be looking for something on the ground. There was still a lot of pretense, a lot of acting as if around the club scene. True, many guys still had jobs, cars, and apartments, but many more were just pretending they did. I know that a lot of these guys were shooting up crystal meth as much as I was, but talking about using needles was definitely taboo. The thing was, as long as you looked like you were holding it together, you could still find people who will give you drugs. For me, the final split between these two worlds came after a 5 or 6 day run with no sleep and very little food. I found myself pushing a shopping cart full of junk right past the front door of the most popular gay club in Hollywood. The very place where I had first scored some meth and spent every weekend getting loaded ever since. Needless to say, they never have to worry about seeing my face in that place again. Okay, well, this chapter is really juicy, and I could go on forever with this, but we don't want to get stuck. Okay. I want to spark your interest, people. I still got your interest? Oh, my God, it's 30 minutes. Okay, well, the next chapter is called Dope Dealer. So this is how it all switched when I got to San Francisco. But I am not making no hour-long videos. So God bless you guys. Listen, write your story down. I want to encourage people to write. You ever want to know anything about the process of writing, about publishing your work, getting it on Amazon, whatever, put it in the comments. I'm more than willing to help. This has been the most therapeutic thing I've ever done. And I've been free ever since. And the truth, will make you free. So I don't got to worry about nobody spraying my shit because it's already sprayed. Just buy the book. I think it's $2.99 for download later.